Hi, this is Erica Merrill, and I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video. And I'm very excited to have with us today Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee. She owns a family law firm out in the Worcester area, and she and the members of her firm are fantastic. And we are very honored and lucky that she comes on this show every week and tells us all about the issues of divorce and answering questions that could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long run and a lot of grief for your family. So today we're going to be talking about real estate in divorce, which is a very hot topic. I want to thank you so much for coming on today, Nicole, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So let's talk about real estate, because that is one of the first things people ask themselves when they're going to go through a divorce is, where's everybody going to live now if we're not going to live together?
That is always the $1 million question. And that's really what you got to figure out, because if you want the house, you don't want to leave. If you don't care about the house, maybe you do leave, but you still want to make sure you get your share. So it's always one of those really hot topics that we go, oh, I'm going to keep it. No, I can afford to keep it. Maybe I want to leave. And, you got all these questions. So first and foremost, you got to figure out whether you want it. And if you do, how much can you afford to pay for it?
So, yeah, and that is interesting because presumably one person is going to make more than the other in the couple. And, sometimes it's a huge difference in what they earn. And so who ends up paying the mortgage while you're pending all of these big decisions, which do take time sometimes when you're going through a divorce?
Well, the long and short is it depends. The reality is, first we're going to look at is whose name's on the mortgage. So if it is only Erica's name on the mortgage, then obviously Erica's the only one that can be bound to it from the lender's perspective. That doesn't mean in the divorce court we can't make Erica's spouse liable for it. So it really depends that legally with mortgage company X, Y, and Z, Erica's responsible. However, in probate court, both of them are responsible, or the husband's responsible. So it certainly can be different. Generally speaking, the general rule is if you're living in the house, you should be paying for it. Now, again, that's the general assumption. It doesn't mean it's always happening. Again, we're going to look at those finances. And if there's huge discrepancies, maybe the spouse that is not living in the house has to pay for it, or maybe we do some kind of proration. So it all depends. We definitely would have to go into court, get a court order, and that court order would determine who's responsible to pay what expenses.
In your experience, do you find a lot of people arguing over who's going to stay and who's going to go, like right in the beginning, or do people typically know, or they get in a fight and they're just like, I'm leaving, and they leave their house behind, and it could be a huge mistake? I'm not sure. Do you see a lot of that right in the beginning?
I see both extremes. I have the I'm getting out, I can't deal with you, you're crazy psycho. And then I have I'm not getting out, you leave. I'm not leaving. And then there's more animosity and hostility in that scenario. But, you get one extreme or the other most often. Sometimes it's just, hey, we've been separated and, my spouse moved out 5 years ago and now we're finally getting around to getting a divorce. Those are the great cases because now we don't have to necessarily worry about it. And we've also set a precedent as to who's going to be responsible for it, because that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, that they've been separated and living apart. But when you're started with we're living together, that's really when it's going to be an all or nothing for one of the parties.
So that's, that is very interesting. And there's a lot to sort out when it comes to where you're going to live. A lot of emotions involved there. So what about the real estate taxes? How does that work? Does that get divvied up, or does one person have to assume the responsibility if they're also paying the mortgage? I think that a lot of times that payment is included in your mortgage.
Yeah, if it's included in a mortgage, obviously it's going to be responsible whoever's paying for it. But if it's not included, or like the real estate insurance may not be. So those two things may or may not be escrowed in your mortgage. If they're escrowed, obviously, again, the mortgage person that's paying for it is going to be responsible for it. If it's paid outside of it, then we really have to make that determination. We're going to really, again, look at those financial statements, determine what have the parties been doing historically, and more importantly, who has the ability to pay what moving forward. So it's definitely going to be on a case by case basis. Again, giving a little bit more credence to, hey, if you're living in the house, you're going to have to be paying most of these expenses, again, without knowing what the discrepancies are in their income.
So here's something interesting. What if they won't leave? I mean, you haven't decided who's going to stay. I mean, I'm not sure. Can you evict them? And sometimes there's even like an elderly parent of your spouse living there, or maybe other family members. Can you evict anyone from your house once they've decided who gets to stay? If they decide they don't want to leave, no matter what the court says?
Well, I guess, a lot of times I have people that are trying to evict without even going through the courts. They're going to evict through housing court because that's a better court, and I can evict somebody. They're just living here. They don't have a lease. I can leave. I can kick them out. No, you're a spouse. You can't do that. Well, maybe it's your in-laws. Oh, I'm going to evict my in-laws. Well, again, your spouse still theoretically has a marital interest in the property, regardless of whether your name is on the deed or not. So long and short is you're not going to be able to evict anyone. Let's start with that premise. Because if you try, then if it's the in-laws are going to go to their child and go, hey, Sally, are you trying to evict me? Oh, no, you can stay here. Well, Sally's name's not on the deed, but again, she's be able to go into housing court and testify that they're going through a divorce and this is a housing court, or this is a probate matter rather than a housing court matter, and ask that the case be dismissed because, again, she has a marital interest in the property, and the court's going to go, yeah, this is the wrong court. Go across the hallway. And the same thing is going to happen, again, if she has a marital interest and you're trying to evict her, you're not going to be able to get her out. So the only way to do that is to go into probate court and get a court order. Now, let's just say, for instance, you did get a court order and you're supposed to leave by, May 5th, and it's now June, whatever, and they have it moved. Well, what's your remedy? Your remedy is to go back into court and file a contempt. And the contempt would simply be, hey, we have a court order. It says this date. She hasn't done this date. We need to get her out. In which case, the judge is either going to make a further order. Maybe the judge holds them in contempt of court. Maybe the judge, actually locks them up. There's a lot of avenues that the judge can do. Whether or not the judge is going to take that extreme, probably not. But they're certainly going to most likely find them in contempt, and they're certainly most likely going to say, now you have to pay their attorney's fees because you didn't follow the court order. So long and short, no, you still don't get to change the locks and lawfully remove them. You have to do it through the court system.
I mean, that is so interesting. And what a great point that you're making here, because, if you're not a lawyer, you don't realize there are different courts, and that you might need to take a case that seems like it should be, for probate, or, maybe it's for marital, family court. You don't know all the time. And so that's why you should have an attorney to help you go through it, because there's obviously, if this, then that, going on a lot with what you're talking about. And it can be very confusing for someone that does not do this for a living. I'm sure you've seen a lot of mistakes of people going about it in the wrong order or going to the wrong place, and it's cost them a lot of money because they started wrong and they used the wrong they used the wrong tactics and strategies.
Absolutely. And I think not only that, but again, depending on how bad those strategies are, you may be liable for the other party's attorney's fees. Your obviously case may be dismissed, which means you're out of pocket your court costs, you're out of pocket your summons and your service. So you're out of pocket multiple things, even if you're representing yourself. And then again, if you have to pay the other party's attorney's fees, and then, oh, wait, you got to start all over again, or you got to start in another court, it can get very costly, not to mention the fact that you're also taking time off from work to go to these courts to get zero results.
Yeah, that is very costly. Time is money, and truer words were never said. Can you tell me, I have another probably obvious question, but when people don't get along and they're getting divorced, they often hate each other. Um, if they're still living in the same house, is there a way that you can get your spouse to move out before you're divorced?
Hmm. That is a great question. Let me just tell you, I have done divorce trials where they are living in the same home. And I cringe and I go, am I going to get a call tonight that the police were called? Oh my God, is somebody going to go get a restraining order? How is that going to be? Because, of course, everyone's saying, he said, she said, da, 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 and they're all fighting. And you're going, this is not a good situation going home. So, yes, the simple answer is maybe you might be able to get them out, but you might not. And you might have to suffer. So, hopefully, you have that spare bedroom or that couch or that basement or some other place in the building that you can go to go, this is my space, this is your space, don't touch my space. We'll try to cook at different times, we'll try to use the bathroom at different times and really never talk. That's the ideal world. The problem is sometimes that's the only world because we're looking at all these people and their finances are horrible and they can't afford to move out. They have to use all the money to pay the mortgages and the expenses, and they have no other means to go anywhere else. So you have a very high burden to go into the court, and the court is only going to be able to issue a removal of somebody from the property after an evidentiary hearing. So you're going to have a trial to determine whether or not they meet the criteria so that one of those people have to leave the house. So again, very hard to do, certainly not something to do without an attorney present.
Well, that sounds like it is worthy of some kind of Lifetime movie plot. I mean, it sounds awful. I've heard from some of the criminal attorneys that a lot of times when there's a divorce, someone will make a false accusation in order to get them out of the house quicker, by having the authorities say that they can't come near them, so that like there might be a harassment order out from false accusations, and then you've got a criminal matter on top of the divorce matter. I mean, have you seen that?
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, a lot of times it is exactly that. It's false allegations. Now, obviously, if it's legitimate and you need to call the police and get a restraining order, press charges, absolutely do so. But don't use it as a tactic. All too often, people think that, oh, yeah, this is the best way to get them out. Well, yeah, that's also skirting the issue. And oh, by the way, you're going to go into court and you're going to perjure yourself. So you have to kind of think about that, as that's going to be a major issue moving forward. The other part is maybe when you do file those criminal charges, maybe your spouse ends up losing his job as a result of it. So there's consequences to your actions. You really have to think about, is it warranted? And more importantly, is it legitimate? I mean, again, you cry wolf, it's going to come back to bite you in some format. All too often, maybe the police say, hey, why don't you go somewhere else for the night and cool down? That's kind of the best case scenario if there is something going on, and hopefully, your spouse doesn't go off on a tangent and ask for the restraining order or, criminal charges. And maybe you do need to calm down. Maybe you do need to take the night off and go over to your parents' house and then come back the next day. There's nothing that says you can't, unless, of course, there's the criminal charges. But again, you have to look at that going, okay, so now we've got to spend more money on another attorney. We've got to fight over this. Now I've lost some rights in the probate court. And more importantly, like I said, what if you lose your job or now you have a criminal record that may impact your ability in the future?
Nightmare situations for sure. So you can't cure stupid sometimes. And sometimes people do really stupid things. I mean, especially when it comes to money and real estate and things that they think are theirs. I've heard all these horror stories about cash being hidden in boxes and valuables being hidden and stolen and, whatnot. But are there people that will actually go and try to sell the house pending the divorce? Is it allowed? Is there a way that it's allowed? I mean, you just hear all this stuff.
So, simple answer is no. So, there's obviously an automatic civil restraining order in place that basically says neither of you are allowed to convey, alter, or sell any assets pending the divorce without court approval or your spouse's permission. So simple answer is, guess what? As the moment you list the house for sale and you haven't gone into court, I'm going to be filing a contempt against you. I'm going to be getting your attorney on the phone and I'm going to be saying, hey, you better knock it off. You don't have any authority to do that. That's the easy answer. Now, the reality is, what can I do it if I want to sell it and I want to get the court's permission? Again, you have to go into court on a temporary order and say, I want the house to be sold. Again, the court's going to have to look at the facts. Does the other party want to sell it? If both parties want to, great. That's kind of the easy avenue. But if one person doesn't, the judge is going to listen to facts of the case. What specifically? Why does it need to be sold today? Why can't it be sold when we get your divorce? What's going on that there's such an emergency? Now, sometimes there are emergencies such as the house is in foreclosure and we know that we can make some money and not have to file bankruptcy. And so that's most likely a legitimate scenario. But in any case, we're going to have to look at those facts and determine what is relevant. And more importantly, whether or not the court's going to give you permission to sell pending the divorce.
Wow. I mean, those are some tricky situations. And bankruptcy and divorce do go hand in hand sometimes. So I can see what you're saying about that. So if the house is sold, who typically gets the money?
Well, good question. So generally speaking, what's going to end up happening is when you get that court order that says you're allowed permission to sell, we're also going to tell the court what we're going to do with those proceeds. So those proceeds are most likely going to be held in escrow. So we're going to say that one of the attorneys most likely is going to hold the proceeds either pending a further court order or by agreement of the parties. So obviously the parties can agree, hey, look, we're going to split it 50-50. We don't care. We know this is our only asset and we're just going to be done with it. Then in the meantime, maybe it's a situation where we're going, well, I don't think it should be 50-50, or, hey, there's other assets and we have to do some kind of offset. So could we get an advance? Maybe, but we also could maybe get none of that. So it really depends. That the key thing is when we go into court and we ask the judge to sell the property is we also have to make a determination as to who's going to get what and when, and if they're going to get any of it.
So that's definitely interesting. Do people typically have to wait until the end of the divorce, everything's signed, before they can get the proceeds for the house that's sold during the divorce?
Generally speaking, the two attorneys will talk and make suggestions about a partial advance. So let's just say, we're holding $200,000 in escrow. We'll probably talk to the parties and go, hey, well, we know we have these expenses that have to be paid, whether it be credit cards or IRS debt or stuff of that nature. We know that there's other debts that we're going to have to pay. So the attorneys don't want to release it all because, one, we don't know if it's going to be a 50-50, but two, more importantly, we know that there's other debts to get paid. So maybe we as the attorneys come up with an agreement and say, hey, we either A, pay these now, or B, we hold money in escrow but we at least give you guys an advance. We know that we're holding $200,000. We can afford to give each party, $25,000. Then we're still holding $150,000. So the simple answer is we can come up with any number that works for the parties, but it has to work for the parties globally. And if not, again, the judge is going to make that determination. All too often, I've seen judges go, no, I'm not going to make that determination until final hearing. So unless you do have an agreement, chances are that money is going to be held in escrow until the pretrial or the date that you file the separation agreement and the judge approves it, or obviously after trial and the judge has made a final determination.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And, I guess the moral of the story is, really, you need to ask the court for permission before you do anything, before you try to kick somebody out, before you try to sell the house, before you try to figure out divvying up the assets. That needs to be done through the courts. Just don't go off and sell things off and give things to your friends or sell your car for $1 or whatever. Whatever people do some crazy stuff. You hear about that in the bankruptcy courts too. And, people get crazy when their life is about to change in a major way, and they get worried about where they're going to live and how they're going to eat and what they have and what's going to happen with their stuff. I know someone that had like an argument over a lawnmower. And they were so worried about who was going to get this lawnmower that they just bought. I don't even think it was a riding lawnmower. I'm not sure. I'd fight over a riding lawnmower, maybe.
Yeah, and it's funny when they all do that, and you're going, "How much money are you paying me an hour to fight over this?" So sometimes we really just kind of shake our head and go, "What are you people thinking?" And sometimes it is a sentimental thing, but a lot of times it's just, "I'm not giving it to you because I know you want it." Okay, great. Or I'm not giving it to you out of principle. Principle is such an expensive thing. That word, I just look at it and laugh and go, great. I'm happy to take all of your money because that's what principle means. Um, it doesn't mean that you're going to get something that you're entitled to. It doesn't mean that you're going to win your case. It means that you're going to spend a lot of money unnecessarily for that principle. And yes, you might actually win the principle, but it comes at a really high cost.
It certainly does. I mean, in the end, and one of the things I hear you say over and over again, it's not about like getting the other person. It's about making sure that everyone can live and everything is split up fairly, and everyone can be happy going forward, because you're freeing people from their cages, and you can't believe that when you're going through the divorce. But after it's done and you start feeling better, you're like, you know what? Yeah, it was a cage, and I'm really happy, that I'm out of it, and it was really tough to get through it. So if you do have questions about divorce or family court for any reason, you should absolutely give Nicole and her team a call. They are experts, and they're darn nice people. And they just have really great strategies, and they won't let you get in the muck and get into something that you can't get out of later without spending a lot of money. So it's worth having a conversation. And honestly, their empathy too. They're just really great. So give them a call. Nicole, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's very valuable information, and we really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a great weekend, everyone. This has been Erica Merrill from Perfect Legal Video and Nicole Reeves Lavallee at Reeves Lavallee PC out in the Worcester area. Their information is right here for you. And we'll look forward to talking to you again next week.